where we left off, right? We talked about the causes of imperialism and the different types of it. And so now we're going to kind of take that knowledge and apply it to what's going on, what happens in Africa during this time period. Africa is kind of one of the first places to be colonized by these people, because arguably at the time it's the least developed in the world, part of the world, and so Europeans, who are the kind of the most developed at the time, can take advantage of it. Right? And as we go on, we'll think also about how this affects the people of Africa, and in class we'll do some activities related to that. So the scramble for Africa is kind of the term historians give to this time period where the European nations partition or divide Africa amongst themselves. And again, like we mentioned previously, there's economic, militaristic, and religious interests involved here. The desire to convert people. The French want certain territories to help convert to Catholicism. English, there's the Protestant Christianity there. Militaristic interests, right? There's strategic resources and strategic locations. For example, the English want to have control of Egypt and eventually develop something called the Suez Canal. So there's all these different motivations involved here. And so by the time we get to World War One, Africa has essentially been fully colonized, right? All the major European powers have at least some territory that they are in charge of and control. Whether that's direct or indirect is kind of varies amongst the continent, but basically all but two places in Africa at this time are independent, and that's Ethiopia, which is kind of here in the eastern horn of Africa, and then there is Liberia, which is on the west coast of Africa. Liberia was actually, interesting enough, originally founded as a place for former and freed slaves of the United States to kind of return to Africa. That was kind of a movement in the United States leading up to the Civil War. And so some, not too many, but some Africans then did, in fact, leave America and settle in this region. So that's kind of the origins of Liberia. But this map kind of shows the different colors here. Britain, kind of major places to associate with Britain. We have Egypt that they control, Nigeria, and South Africa. France has most of West Africa here. Places that will become Algeria, for example, Morocco, Chad, and other places like that. The Belgians, who are some people we don't talk about too much in this class, the Belgians control the modern day Congo region, and Italy even claims some land here in the east horn of Africa. And by the time we get to Mussolini and in the 1920s, before the World War II, Mussolini and the Italians would actually invade and take control of Ethiopia. So all these different nations have territory in Africa that they're benefiting from economically with the natural resources that are present in those places. And essentially, this scramble for Africa, this partition of Africa, is kind of formally agreed upon in 1884, which that's a conference called the Berlin Conference. All right, it was organized by a man named Otto von Bismarck, who should sound familiar to us, right? Because Otto von Bismarck was the leading German politician who helped unify Germany as one single state back in 1870. And at this conference, the several powers of Europe, the Germans, the French, the British, the Italians, so on and so forth, agree on which parts of the continent will be controlled by who. It sets out parameters to regulate African colonization and African trade. And interestingly enough, no Africans are actually invited. Right? So here, this political cartoon, this man here is wearing a classic German military uniform. So that's Bismarck. Cutting up a cake that says Afrique, right? Which could be the German or possibly French way of saying Africa. And it's being cut up into different parcels for all these different men sitting here, right, representing all the other nations in Europe. During this time period, there are then some notable explorers and settlers, people of European descent, who go into Africa. And obviously, to the Africans, Africa was explored and known. But to outsiders, a lot of the continent, particularly the interior of the continent, the center of the continent, was relatively unknown by Europeans. And so several different explorers from these places like Britain and Belgium, for example, explore these different parts of the nation, of the continent. So David Livingstone is a famous British explorer who actually, there's a whole book written about him because he was missing for years. No one had heard from him. And so someone else goes to find him, and they do find him kind of living and continuing to explore. He was just so cut off from the world because of where he was. He explores the Zambezi River region, which is in Tanzania. So just to go back, Tanzania is kind of in the southeastern part of the nation today, of the continent today, sorry. Henry Stanley is a Belgian who explores and helps kind of establish Belgian control over the Congo. So again, that's kind of here in Central Africa. And then we have another famous name, a man named Cecil Rhodes. He was a British explorer and settler. And he ultimately helped settle southern Africa. And in fact, the original name of part of this land was Rhodesia, right? So an African nation known as Rhodesia was named after Cecil Rhodes. That country no longer exists. It's been renamed, divided and renamed. We're going to focus on Cecil Rhodes because the British kind of have one of the most outsized influences here in Africa. He was a British imperialist, right? So he fully supported the notion of expanding Britain's empire. And so he helped to settle colonies in South Africa. But interestingly enough, the original white settlers of southern Africa, modern-day South Africa, were actually Dutch. And so by the time the British get there, there's kind of this unique Dutch-African culture there. And they're called the Boers, B-O-E-R-S. And so these Boers are Dutch descendants who have grown up in Africa for generations at this point. And they speak a language known as Afrikaans. So it's kind of this interesting hybrid. The Boers don't want to give up their control, and they don't want to cede it to the British, and so it leads to a war between these Boers and the British, and it's known as the Boer War. Ultimately, these Dutch descendants lose, and Cecil Rhodes helps to establish the nation of Rhodesia, or the territory of Rhodesia, I should say, not nation, the territory. So an interesting guy here, Cecil Rhodes. Another kind of name to mention would be the Belgian ruler at this time, which was a man named King Leopold. And what's interesting about Belgium at this time is that they have a king, just much like England today has a queen, but the king doesn't have did not have too much formal power in Belgium. Interesting enough, though, the Belgian Congo was not a colony controlled by the nation of Belgium, but it was a private colony controlled by the King of Belgium, King Leopold. And so while he did not have too much power in Belgium, he could rule pretty strongly and independently in the Congo. And unfortunately, he's kind of known for treating the people of the Congo harshly. He would, we'll look at different images as we go, but there are images of men without hands because they were seen not working hard enough, or maybe they were trying to steal something, but because they were not being paid well enough, right? People were abused. The Belgian soldiers there, the Belgian officials there were corrupt, right? And so, out of all places in Europe, kind of the Belgian Congo is kind of stands out as one of where some of the most abusive practices of colonization occurred. And in class, we're going to work on some activities looking at these different treatments of different nations, and how that influenced or affected these Africans living there. So we're going to stop there for now, and we'll pick up next lecture with imperialism in a different part of the world in the Middle East.